Welcome to Moments with Marianne. This is your host, Marianne Pastana. And we're here today with special guest, Dr. Steve Taylor, who's here to share with us his new book, The Adventure, A Practical Guide to Spiritual Awakening, an Eckhart Tolle edition. So we've all heard about spiritual awakening, but what does that really look like? Today's show is going to dive into just that. So, Dr. Steve Taylor is an author of many best-selling books. He's also the senior lecturer in psychology at Leeds Beckett University and the chair of the transpersonal psychology section of the British Psychological Society. His articles and essays have been published in over 100 academic journals, magazines, and newspapers, and he blogs for Scientific American and Psychology Today. So let's welcome to the show, Dr. Steve Taylor.
Hi, Marianne. Great to be with you.
What an honor it is to have you here again, and I'm so excited we get to talk about this book. What inspired you to write The Adventure?
I was, for a long time, I've been encountering people who've undergone spiritual awakenings and people who are undergoing journeys of spiritual exploration. And I've been feeling for a long time that I wanted to kind of simplify the spiritual path and explain the different stages and the different qualities that are involved in spiritual awakening, just to create a kind of guidebook. Because I sense that a lot of people are a bit confused about spiritual awakening, or maybe they're not really sure how to undergo it or what's happening if they are undergoing it already. So it's really an impulse to create some clarity and some guidance for people.
So when you talk about spiritual awakening, what does that mean?
To me, spiritual awakening is a state that can be cultivated. It doesn't necessarily belong to religion or spirituality. It's a state that people can encounter or experience in everyday life, even if they don't know anything about spirituality in a traditional sense. It's really an expansion of awareness, an intensification of awareness. Actually, I quite like the term spiritual opening, because in spiritual awakening, it's as if our whole being opens wide to the world. We expand into reality, and everything becomes more intense and more expansive. The world becomes much more real and beautiful. We feel our connection to other people and other beings much more strongly, so that we become compassionate and empathic. We feel a deep connection to our own being. Our own being opens up, and we become aware of potentials and energies deep inside us, which we were never aware of before. So everything becomes more open and more expansive in spiritual awakening.
So I understand that you spent many years studying spiritual awakening. How was that?
It began with my own experiences, because I had spiritual experiences as a teenager. Moments in which my being would open up, and everything would become everything around me would become incredibly real and beautiful. And I'd sense that the whole world was filled with a harmony, and I was part of the harmony. But I didn't understand the experiences at the time. I thought it was maybe a little crazy, because I didn't know anything about these experiences, or I didn't know any other people who were having them. But it was later on that I began to read books about spirituality, about mysticism, and I realized that I wasn't crazy after all. Or maybe I was, but there were lots of other crazy people out there. So at least I didn't feel so alone. But then I became interested in psychology. I became aware of a field called transpersonal psychology, and it's the type of psychology which studies spiritual experiences and spiritual awakenings. So I realized that I was meant to be a transpersonal psychologist. So I went to university to study transpersonal psychology, and eventually got a PhD in transpersonal psychology. So I began to devote my time as a researcher to study other people's spiritual experiences. And I began to realize that a lot of people didn't just have experiences that lasted for a short amount of time. A lot of people would actually undergo a shift into a constant or ongoing spiritual state. It often occurred following periods of trauma in their lives or turmoil in their lives. They'd undergo a kind of an identity shift, in which they shifted up to this higher state of being. So I spent a lot of time studying those transformational experiences in people.
So, do people have to go through some type of major turmoil, trauma in order to have a spiritual awakening, or are there many other paths to that?
There are many paths. Some people do undergo spiritual awakening following trauma and turmoil. It's not uncommon. That could be a diagnosis of cancer, a period of prolonged depression, a long period of addiction. It could be intense stress. Really, any intense turmoil has the power to break down our identity. And when our identity breaks down, a new identity emerges in its place, a spiritual identity. So that's not uncommon. But I think most people undergo a much more gradual spiritual awakening, which usually occurs as a result of certain paths or practices that they follow. It can be accidental sometimes too. Sometimes when people live a life of service, when the main aim in life is to serve their community or their neighbors or their family, that can be a kind of spontaneous spiritual path which leads to awakening. But I think in most cases it is a gradual path. Some people follow certain traditions, like say the Kabbalah or Sufism or Taoism or Buddhism. So following one of those paths can lead you to awakening, or as I say, it can be a much more spontaneous path.
I understand you say that awakening is the greatest adventure we could undertake. Why is that?
I think it's what we were born to do. Every living being goes through a process of physical growth, including us human beings. But maybe one of the things which differentiates human beings from some other animals is that we undergo a process of psychological growth too. All through our lives, we undergo some form of growth, some form of development. And that's why it feels so right. When we do grow in our lives, it feels natural and right because it's what we were meant to do. It's what the whole of evolution since the beginnings of life on Earth has been about development, about expansion and intensification of awareness. So that's what we were meant to do. And, I think everybody, whether they know it or not, is undergoing a path of spiritual development. It happens spontaneously through the challenges that life offers us. Some people do it in a more conscious way through following some of the practices or paths that we've just discussed. But everybody is undergoing a gradual path of spiritual development. Some people are further on than others. Some people are just beginning. But it's I really feel that it's what we were meant to do as human beings in this life.
So, should we look at spiritual awakening as a goal?
Well, in a way, but the term goal is a little bit problematic because the ego latches onto goals. The ego loves to have a goal to head towards. It loves to feel that it's achieving something. So yeah, I think the term goal is a little bit misleading. And a goal also implies an endpoint. And I don't think spiritual awakening has an endpoint. It's a kind of endless, ongoing process that leads, it probably continues for all eternity, maybe from one life to the next. So there is no. It's a kind of fallacy to think in terms of an endpoint. It's an endless adventure.
So, what are the 8 qualities of wakefulness?
I highlighted 8 qualities, which partly came from my research into. I've investigated hundreds of cases of spiritual awakening, but also came from my own experiences and my own studies of the world's spiritual traditions. Because obviously, every spiritual tradition emphasizes certain qualities which need to be cultivated in order to undergo spiritual development. So, yeah, these were the 8 qualities which kept arising in my research, and everybody I mentioned commented on certain these qualities. So, the first one is disidentification from the ego. I think this, in some ways, this is the most important quality because it's the gateway to spiritual awakening. You can really only undergo awakening once you've disidentified from your thought mind and realize that there is a space between you and your thoughts. So once you've gone through that gateway into spiritual awakening, then I specify the quality of gratitude or overcoming the taking for granted syndrome. Then there's the quality of presence, then the quality of altruism, which is associated with compassion and empathy and love. Then we move on to the quality of acceptance, or no longer resisting the realities of our lives, even if they may be seemingly unpleasant. Then I move on to integration with the body, which is important because some spiritual traditions see the body as a kind of enemy or an illusion. But I think it's more fruitful to develop harmony with the body, to see the body as sacred and spiritual, and to integrate your spiritual life with the body. And then the seventh quality is detachment, which doesn't mean indifference to the world. Detachment means no longer depending on external things for your well-being or your identity. It means not being dependent on possessions or ambitions or success or even other people for your identity and well-being. And finally, the eighth quality I emphasize is embracing mortality, which means acknowledging and accepting the reality of your own mortality or death. So those are the eight qualities which I emphasize in my book, The Adventure.
Well, let's talk about disidentification. Can you share a little bit about that?
Well, I think most human beings are so identified with their thoughts that their mood is created by their thoughts. However they feel in any particular moment is dictated by the content of their thoughts. So if they may find themselves thinking negative thoughts, they're worrying about the past or the future, complaining about their lives or about the world, and obviously that puts them in a negative mood. But at other times, they may be thinking positive thoughts, maybe looking forward to things in the future or feeling sentimental about good times in the past, which puts them in a good mood. But generally, because the thought mind is quite restless and it does tend to veer towards negative thoughts, it creates a negative state within us. It creates a sense of disturbance or restlessness and negativity. And in that sense, you could probably call it the main source of human unhappiness, identifying with your thought mind. And one of the common qualities of awakened people is that they don't identify with the thought mind. They realize that thought is just a process. It's like a kind of biological process which takes place. It has the same status maybe as the circulation of the blood or the heartbeat. It's just a process that takes place within our being. And so awakened people, there is a space between them and their thoughts. So they don't take the contents of their minds seriously. And also, because they don't identify with their thoughts, their thinking tends to be quieter than other people's. So their minds are fairly quiet and empty compared to others. And as I say, that's the really the most important quality in the journey of it's the quality you need to begin the journey of awakening. Because once you go through that gateway, then you're able to develop in a lot of other ways as well.
Are there negative effects of the thought chatter that we have?
Many negative effects. Man, sometimes thought chatter can be pleasant. When you ponder over good times in the past, or when you anticipate good times in the future. But generally, most thought chatter is negative. If you analyze the content of your thoughts, most of it will be about the past or the future. A lot of it will be, contemplating negative events to come or that have passed. You will be thinking back to situations of difficulty in the past, and it will create feelings of resentment towards other people. I talk about the futility of should be or should have been and could have been or would have been. That those verbs are all based on the past. It's all based on examining past situations and thinking about how things could have turned out differently, which is completely futile because you can't change the past, obviously. But all of that thought chatter creates negativity, and it leads us into the quality of presence, because when you think about the past or about the future, you miss the present, you miss the reality of the present. And that's really where happiness lies, not in the past or future, but purely in the reality of your experience in the present moment.
I know a lot of people, and maybe even including myself, have gotten kind of caught up in the story we create of our lives. How
Mm.
important is that? And is that something we should really look at and kind of unravel?
Yes. I mean, again, it's about identification. We identify with the story of our lives. We all carry a long series of past experiences, and we think of ourselves as the sum total of all of those experiences. But, that can create feelings of inferiority. If we've had a lot of setbacks in the past and we haven't achieved as much as we would have liked. So here in the present, we may feel inferior because of our story in the past. We may have low self-esteem. We may feel that the world has treated us badly. So it all creates a feeling of negativity because we're caught up in the story of our lives. But also, even if you've had a positive story in the past, even if you've had a lot of achievement and success, that can have negative effects too, because it can create a sense of superiority. It can give you overly high self-esteem to the extent that, you feel other people should treat you with deference, and you may become arrogant because of it. But ultimately, the problem with the story of our lives is that they take us away from the present. Because again, it doesn't matter what's happened in the past. The past is completely immaterial to our happiness. It doesn't exist anymore. So the only source of happiness is right here and right now. So I think of the present moment as is a kind of amnesty from the past. You can let go of everything that's happened in your story because it has no relevance to what's happening right now in the present. So you can disregard all the past experiences of failure or disenchantment or even of success and achievement because it has no bearing on your well-being right here and right now. And if you do bring your whole attention into the present moment, it's always an experience of well-being, no matter what has happened in the past.
Your chapter on gratitude really caught my attention. And I know you talk about taking for granted syndrome. What is that? And is that something we can overcome?
I think the taking for granted syndrome is one of the biggest issues that human beings have to face. One of the primary causes of human unhappiness. It's our tendency to take things for granted. And a good example is our health. If you're lucky enough to live in a fairly healthy body, you kind of switch off to the positivity of that state. And it's really only if you have a serious illness or an injury, then you realize how fantastic it is to be in a fairly healthy body. You realize how miraculous the body is when it's healing. You become aware of the millions of tiny processes which take place in the body every moment to keep you healthy and alive. But again, once you've returned to normal health, then you forget again. You switch off to the reality of the situation and take the body for granted. It's the same with people too. I sometimes give the example of somebody falling in love. You fall in love and you meet the perfect partner who's going to bring you complete happiness for the rest of your life. And it is like that for a while, maybe a few months. But after a few months, maybe a year or two, you start to take the person for granted. Most people, to some extent anyway, the taken for granted syndrome begins to work on your relationship. So you switch off to the value of the person. And that has a detrimental effect on the relationship. And then that happens in every aspect of our lives. We take our lives for granted. I use the example of astronauts who went to the moon. There were a number of astronauts who went to the moon in the late 60s and early 70s. And one of the things that they commented on when they were looking at the Earth from space or when they came back to Earth, they became aware of how lucky they were to live on this planet. They became aware of the value of all of the tiny things which took place in their lives, the value of food, of weather, of the people in their lives. Everything became incredibly, valuable and precious. And that stayed with them. I saw a documentary in which one astronaut, I think it was a guy called Alan Bean, he said that since he was an old man when he was saying this, but he said that since he's returned from the moon, he's never complained about anything, and he's never complained about the weather because he's just glad that there is weather here on the planet Earth. So it's really about it's about being aware of the reality because we are incredibly fortunate in so many ways. Most of us are incredibly fortunate in so many ways. There are so many tiny blessings that fill our lives. So it's about bringing our awareness to the reality of those and not forgetting them.
I really like how in your book you talk about how to get into this place. You recall a situation when someone showed you kindness.
That's right. Yeah. I think we underestimate the value of kindness. When I think back over my own life, the situations which stand out mostly of most significance to me are situations where people were showed me kindness, and also, when I show kindness to others, that's also an incredibly powerful experience. I often think that, at school, we should teach children the power of altruism, the power of kindness, because it has such a beneficial effect both on the person who receives it and the person who gives it, and also anybody who witnesses it. To witness acts of kindness is quite a powerful experience. And I think that's why every religion, every spiritual tradition emphasizes the value of kindness and encourages people to practice it.
Your discussion about human beings, I thought was right on. And it's interesting how we're called human beings. We should really be human doings.
That's right. Yeah, I suggest that human beings are one of the most misnamed species on the planet because we actually spend very little time being. We spend more time doing or wanting or thinking. We should probably be called human thinkings or human doings. And it's kind of ironic because you know, in the same way that happiness lies in being present, being present is closely associated with being. Because when you do things, it tends to take you away from the present. Not always. You can act in harmony with the present, but often when we're active, we get absorbed in one particular activity and forget the reality of our surroundings and the reality of our experiences. But when we spend time in being, then we naturally fall into harmony with ourselves and into harmony with the world around us. So it becomes a very powerful experience.
In your book, you talk about the three A's. So, what is that, and how does that relate to all of this?
I suggest that there are three basic states in which human beings spend our lives. So we spend a lot of our time in, I also call these the three A's. And we spend a lot of time in abstraction. That's the first A, abstraction. And that's when we are caught up in thought chatter in our heads, thinking about the future or the past, or daydreaming about alternate realities. So that happens a lot when we're in waiting situations or when we have nothing to focus our attention on. Sometimes when we are in bed trying to get to sleep, our mind tends to fill up with this chatter and our attention gets immersed in it. So that's abstraction. The second A is absorption, which is when we narrow our attention down to one specific activity or one specific form of entertainment, and we immerse our attention in this activity or in this entertainment. So obviously, when we work, we're often in a state of absorption, focusing on the tasks of our jobs. And in our free time, we're often in a state of absorption, watching films or videos and so forth. So we definitely spend a lot of time in the state of absorption, probably more time than we spend in a state of abstraction. But the third A is awareness. So we've had abstraction, absorption, and now we have awareness. And awareness is equivalent to a state of presence. It's when we bring our attention into the present moment and we give our whole attention to our experience in the present moment and to our surroundings in the present moment. It's very similar to what people call mindfulness, just being mindful of your experience in the present moment. And I think most people tell me that they don't experience, out of these three A's, they experience awareness the least, on a daily basis. But we occasionally experience awareness when we're walking in the countryside, aware of the beautiful surroundings. We sometimes experience it when we're playing sport, for example, and we're very intensely aware of the situation around us. But generally, I've asked thousands of people which of these three A's they experience most in their lives, and they normally say that they experience awareness. Sorry, normally experience absorption and abstraction the most, and awareness the least. But I suggest that what we need to do is to increase the amount of time we spend in awareness. We need to decrease the first two A's and increase the third A. So I ask people to analyze their experience, to think about which situations put them into a state of awareness, and generally try to increase the amount of time they spend in awareness.
Well, on that note, we're going to pause here for a quick break. We've been speaking with Dr. Steve Taylor in regards to his new book, The Adventure, A Practical Guide to Spiritual Awakening, an Eckhart Tolle edition. We'll be right back after these messages from our sponsors.
Every day, pets are surrendered and abandoned. For these helpless and hurting animals, Paws Humane Society acts as a voice for the voiceless, providing hope for a brighter future. You can make a difference in the life of a shelter pet. Become a humane hero today. Just $10 a month will provide much-needed food, shelter, medical care, and love. It takes a community. It takes heroes like you. Together we can. Together we will. Together we are Paws Humane. Visit pawshumane.org to be a hero in every animal story.
Lindsay Roy's new book, The Gift of Perspective, is a must-read. Lindsay's unique life stories of surviving and thriving after two major life challenges is a wonderful companion to start your new year. It's a great guidebook for anyone facing a challenge, big or small, in business or in life. Lindsay's own stories and the anecdotes of those she met along the way help illuminate real ideas in real circumstances, drawing out reflections and actionable takeaways for all. Full of faith, grit, and humor, this book has the power to change how you see things. The Gift of Perspective is available at Amazon, or visit Lindsay's website at lindsayroy.com.
Are you an actor, public speaker, or an executive telling your story over Zoom? Jean-Louis Rodrigue and Scott Weintraub's new book, Back to the Body, takes the process they use to coach top Hollywood talent like Margot Robbie, Jack Black, and Ke Huy Quan and makes it available to everyone. Using your body and its energy as a point of departure, your work will gain an enhanced level of performance and depth. Back to the Body, available on Amazon and wherever books are sold.
I'd like to thank Jason Eastwood at Guitarfulness for sharing his inspiring music and talent with us. His music is known worldwide for cultivating atmospheres of harmony, inner peace, and clarity. Visit Jason's website at guitarfulness.com. Join his newsletter, be part of his community, and download his music. Welcome back to Moments with Marianne. We're here today with special guest, Dr. Steve Taylor, who's here sharing with us his new book, The Adventure, A Practical Guide to Spiritual Awakening. It seems right now there are so many people that are so detached from relationships, and to be present, my goodness, what a gift that is.
Yeah, it's very, it's important for relationships. Presence is essential to relationships. Because if you're in a state of abstraction or absorption when you're with your partner, they feel disrespected because you're not giving them attention, and it creates discord in relationships. But if you're, especially in the initial stages of a relationship when everything is incredibly rosy and exciting, then you're naturally in a state of presence. You want to give your whole attention to your partner, but it connects with the taking for granted syndrome. As you take a person for granted, you start to give them less awareness, which brings more discord into the relationship. But yeah, it's glorious when you are in a state of awareness in your relationships.
So how do people get to that state of awareness, and what does that feel like?
It feels it's a wonderful experience. It's a state in which all of your surroundings become more real and more beautiful. And you're aware of your own presence in the surroundings, and you feel attuned to your surroundings. So it's an experience of harmony, but it also feels natural. It feels natural and right because it is where we're meant to be. We're not meant to live in the future or the past. We're not meant to give all our attention to thoughts or to activities. The present is our home. It's where we're meant to live. I often say that, every animal has a niche where they live in nature, and the human being's niche is the present. It's where we're meant to be, and it's where we feel comfortable being. And as I say, we all have certain activities in our lives which naturally give rise to presence. So for me, for example, it's walking in the countryside, cycling, swimming. All of those activities put me into a state of presence. Playing music as well puts me into a state of presence. So I encourage people to identify the activities in their lives which bring them presence or awareness, and to make a conscious attempt to practice those activities. And but besides that, I encourage people to, I call it the gentle mental nudge. So whenever you feel that your attention is caught up in thoughts, or whenever you feel as though you're absorbed in an activity just for the sake of it, without necessarily needing to do anything, then give yourself a gentle mental nudge back into the present. I use the metaphor of, when a young child, a toddler, maybe 3 or 4 years old, they're starting to walk, but they can't walk in a straight line. They have a path where they're continually veering off into different directions. So the mind is a bit like that, but sometimes you need to pick up the child and put it back on the path. So you need to do that with your mind, give it a gentle mental nudge back into the present.
So, what are some of the significant changes that someone experiences when they start, where they experience this awakening shift?
Sometimes in the initial stages, awakening can be a little bit challenging, particularly if a person doesn't have a background in spirituality or religion and doesn't really understand what's happening to them. So initially there may be a bit of confusion, because a person senses that they're becoming different. They're different to the people around them. The world seems like a slightly different place. So at the same time as feeling exhilarated because of their expansive awareness, that exhilaration may be overlaid with a feeling of confusion. But that's more likely to happen when awakening is sudden and dramatic. But when you undergo a gradual awakening, those challenges are less likely to occur. But nevertheless, there still may be some degree of disorientation. You still may need to undergo a process of acclimatization, just as when you arrive in a different climate, it takes some time to get used to it. But generally, once you've gone through that process of acclimatization, then everything becomes easier in your life. You become free of the restlessness, the mental restlessness which many human beings are afflicted with, that creates worries and anxiety about the past or the future. You become free of that, and you feel a natural ease. It becomes just comfortable being in yourself and being in the world. So you lose that kind of inner restlessness that a lot of people suffer from. And you also, in fact, this is one of the most kind of overt changes that people undergo when they have an awakening. They begin to relish quietness and inactivity. Whereas in the normal human state, we're often afraid of inactivity and solitude. But in awakening, you know, we lose that fear of solitude and activity, and they become two of our greatest friends. We really, really relish solitude and inactivity because they allow us to enter a state of being, and they allow us to sense the harmony of our true nature. There are also some changes to relationships, and that people usually have more intimate and authentic relationships once they've undergone some degree of awakening. But overall, I'd say that life gets much, much easier. Life becomes a much more pleasant experience. It becomes a joyful, a wonderful experience, partly because you no longer take anything for granted. So you're continually aware of the blessings of your life and of life itself. So life becomes a gift and a privilege.
I like how in your book you talk about we make the shift from a lifestyle of accumulation to one of contribution. And how true is that?
Yeah, that is also a very significant change that people undergo. It's a question of no longer taking from the world and starting to give to the world instead. Switching from, as you say, switching from accumulation to contribution. And that partly comes about through transcending separation. Because when you feel separate, there is a sense of incompleteness. And if you feel incomplete, there is a desire to accumulate things to kind of alleviate your incompleteness. So I think that's why so many people feel a desire to accumulate possessions or to accumulate money or success or achievement. But once you transcend separateness and feel a sense of connection to others and a connection to the world, then you no longer have that need to accumulate. And in place of that, because of the sense of connection you feel, that gives you a sense of empathy and compassion for the sufferings of others. Your primary impulse is to help others, to support others, or maybe in a more general sense to help the world, to help to heal the world, to help the human race, to help the evolution of the human race. Those things become the primary impulse of primary impulses of your life. So there is a very significant shift from taking to giving.
So, can you share with us the role of acceptance in awakening?
Acceptance is a quality which spiritually awakened people naturally develop, and it's about no longer. Partly, it's about no longer wishing for reality to be different than it is, and it's about no longer resisting the reality of your life. So, I mean, to take a very practical example, let's say you become ill. Let's say you have to take a few days off work because you have the flu or a bad cold. The normal human impulse is to feel very frustrated, to think, why me? Why has this happened to me now? And then you consider all the things you've got to do, but are not able to do. You're thinking what your colleagues are going to think about you. But in an awakened mode, those thoughts wouldn't arise. You just accept the reality of the situation. You say, okay, I'm ill. There's nothing I can do about it. All I can do is rest and try to get better as quickly as possible. But none of those other thoughts would arise. Well, there's the same with if you get a serious injury. For example, if you're a sports person, you get a serious injury, there are all kinds of negative thoughts which could arise about the situation. But awakened people don't think in that way. They just accept the reality of the situation. Um, and it doesn't mean that they don't feel the impulse to change their lives. Maybe there are certain things in their lives that need to be changed, but it means that they accept the reality of their lives. And once you've accepted the reality of your life, then you can change it. Then you have a better sense of what needs to be changed. And then you can focus on certain areas and make the necessary changes. But first, you have to switch into that mode of acceptance. And when you do that, it feels incredibly harmonious, because when you resist the reality of your life, when you complain about the reality of your life and wish for things to be different, that creates a lot of discord. It creates a duality between you and the world, because you are not accepting reality, you're denying reality. So when you switch into a mode of acceptance, that duality and discord fades away, and they're replaced by a sense of harmony, even a sense of oneness, because you are becoming one with reality, with the reality of your life. So it's I call that the alchemy of acceptance. When you switch into a mode of acceptance, then your reality becomes much more harmonious.
I think a lot of people have a tough time being in acceptance in their lives of just how things are. Like it should be different, or I should be thinner, or I should be making more money, or whatever that thing is. So it's very
Mm.
interesting when we really accept it. I found your book to be so just empowering to read about that.
Yeah, and you have to ponder over, what if there are certain things that you can't change. I mean, the past is a good example. A lot of people have problems accepting their past because they've been through very negative experiences. People have mistreated them. Maybe they've been unlucky in some way. So they have an attitude of resistance to the past. They don't like thinking about it, and when they do think about it, it creates discord, and it gives rise to a lot of thoughts about, why did this happen? Why did he do this to me, and so forth. But in reality, you have no other choice but to accept the past, because you are powerless to change the past. So you have to accept it. You have to open yourself to it and embrace it, no matter how painful it may have been. You have no choice. And when you do that, it is as if a barrier falls away and you become one with reality. And as you say, that applies to our life situations too. Maybe we do feel that we haven't achieved enough, or maybe we feel that we're not in the right career, that things have gone wrong, or we're in a bad relationship or a bad environment. Well, that may be true, but you have to accept the reality of that. You have to open yourself and embrace the reality of your life. And once you've done that, then you actually become more empowered. You become more capable of changing your life.
So, do our bodies play a role in our awakening?
In my view, it's really important to incorporate the body into your awakening. A lot of spiritual traditions have a negative attitude to the body. There are some traditions that see the body as an illusion. There are some traditions that see the body as a kind of vehicle for the soul. It's not very important, and you have to tame your body in order to increase your soul power. But I don't think that's healthy, because we have on the one hand we have no choice but to inhabit our bodies, and on the other hand, more importantly, the body is sacred. To me, the body is just as spiritual as the soul. I don't think there's really any difference between the body and the soul. The body is an expression of spirit. The body is full of miracles. As I mentioned before, the body is full of millions of miracles that take place every second to keep us healthy and alive. So, it's very important to develop a sense of harmony with the body. On the one hand, just to appreciate the body for all its miracles, and on the other, to see it as the expression of spirit. And one thing I've noticed in my researches on people who've undergone awakening is that they always develop a very healthy attitude to the body. They no longer in many cases they stop drinking or taking drugs or mistreating their bodies. They start to exercise. They start to eat much more healthily. They become aware of how important and sacred the body is, and they become aware of how important it is to feel in harmony with the body. So I think that is very important in awakening. And also the body it can be really useful in the awakening process. One of the ways in which it's useful is because the body is always present. Our minds may be in the future or the past, but the body is always here and now. So you can use your body as a way of becoming present centered. You can give your attention to your body and all the processes within your body. So the body is like an anchor. It kind of anchors us in the present. So that's just one of the ways in which it can be really useful in spiritual development.
In your book, you talk about detachment. How does that fit into all of this?
Detachment, it often has a kind of negative meaning to people because they think it means that withdrawing from the world and becoming indifferent to the world. But detachment, in the sense I mean it, is it's about no longer depending on external things for your identity and well-being. And that's one of the things that human beings tend to do. We tend to depend on external things. We derive our identity from possessions, from our status or success. We derive identity from our ambitions for the future, from our beliefs about the world. And children don't really have external attachments, but as we become adults, we start to pick up all of these attachments, and they form our identity as adult human beings. And they can give us a strong sense of identity. You feel like you really know who you are because you have certain beliefs and you have certain ambitions and possessions and so forth. But all of these attachments, they are very problematic because they separate us from our true nature. They kind of clutter up our beings. We become so attached to external things that we lose our inner self. I think that's why some people get very frustrated when they enter middle age, because they're so full of attachments, but they've lost their true essence as human beings. So every spiritual tradition emphasizes the importance of offloading these attachments and not being too dependent on external things for a well-being. So in the book, I guide people through a process of releasing their attachments to things like possessions and ambitions and beliefs and many other things.
So I'm sure we have some listeners going, okay, well, wait a minute. I like my stuff. Do I have to get rid of everything?
No, no, you don't. Because yeah, that would mean, yeah, I guess one of the issues with detachment, it can go too far. You can you can begin to feel aversion to external things or to attachments. But the problem is not the things in themselves; it's just being attached to them. There's nothing wrong with eating chocolate or drinking wine or having possessions or buying clothes or having success. There's nothing wrong with any of it in itself. It's only when you become dependent on it for your well-being or identity. And I think that you can actually enjoy these things more by not being dependent on them. You know, because you're free of that clinging, of that desire to possess them. Once you just enjoy them in a neutral, non-attached way, they become much more pleasurable.
I think that makes things so much more simpler to be able to enjoy the things that we have without having that strong attachment that having to have it.
Yeah, and it applies to people too, because we can become too attached to other human beings, and there is a difference between attachment and love. Love is oneness, but if you're attached to another person, it implies that you are separate to them because you're kind of clinging to them, you're attached to them, but they're not part of you. And that attachment can, it can have an adverse effect on relationships. But relationships which are free of attachment are much more harmonious because they're based on love.
So you touch on something that I think Westerners have a very difficult time with, and that is the awareness of death. Why is that important to include in your book?
It partly comes from my research because I've encountered so many people who've had spiritual awakenings through encounters with death. You know, it's not uncommon for people to have awakenings after a diagnosis of cancer, and that comes from suddenly being aware of the reality of death. I think as human beings, we tend to take life for granted, and we tend to forget that death is real and inevitable. But when a person is diagnosed with a life-threatening illness, death suddenly becomes real and life becomes fragile and precious. And as a result, they have an awakening. And you've probably heard about the people who have awakenings after near-death experiences when they do die for a few seconds or maybe a few minutes. And when they come back, everything is different. They live the rest of their lives in a transformed state. So death in itself has a lot of power to awaken us. Just being aware of the reality of it, and consequently becoming aware of the preciousness of life. But perhaps the major factor is that death is real; it's inevitable. So we have to accept it. We have to embrace it. It is part of life, and it will inevitably occur. And once you do become aware of the reality of death, everything changes. You're no longer as attached to possessions or to achievements. You tend to be much more present centered. Your relationships become more authentic and more intimate. So for all of those reasons, it's very important to be aware of death and to accept it as part of your reality.
So in your book, you talk about how we can use meditations to cultivate a wakefulness. Can you share more about that with us?
I think, every spiritual tradition recommends some form of meditation. And there are many Christian types of meditation too, particularly in the Christian monastic traditions. So meditation isn't just an Eastern practice, but every culture in the world seems to develop a type of meditation spontaneously. It seems to be a natural human discovery, the discovery that we can quieten our minds and gain access to deeper levels of our being. And in my book, I recommend various types of meditation connected with the 8 qualities of wakefulness. But I also suggest at the end that meditation is generally a really important practice because it encourages all of the 8 qualities. If you practice meditation once a day or twice a day, you will naturally cultivate all of the spiritual qualities. And it's partly because meditation encourages you to disidentify with your mind. It encourages you to be present. It encourages gratitude. It encourages detachment. So, it's probably the most important type of spiritual practice that any of us can follow.
For those that are new to meditation, what would you suggest?
One of the things I found in my role as a teacher is that a lot of people do find meditation difficult, particularly in the beginning if they're completely new to it. Because, most people's minds are very active. And once you sit down in silence and close your eyes, you're suddenly aware of how discordant your mind can be. And focusing on those thoughts can make your problem seem even more negative. So, for that reason, I think a lot of people do find meditation difficult. So, what I suggest is that rather than plunging directly into meditation itself, there are lots of meditative activities that you can follow in your life. So physical exercise, for example, it can be a form of meditation. If you go running, if you go swimming, or just walking in the countryside, that can have a very meditative effect. It slows down your mind. It encourages a sense of connection to your surroundings. So there are a lot of activities like that have a meditative effect. So once you've practiced those activities for a while, and once your mind has become a little quieter, once you've disidentified with your thoughts to some degree, then you can move on to meditation itself, and you won't suffer those difficulties that a lot of people have at the beginning.
So when we get to this place of wakefulness, you hear many people say, well, I've arrived, or is it looked at as a final destination?
I think some people think that there will be a final destination, but once they embark on the process, then they begin to realize that no, there is no destination. I think one of the most interesting conversations I've had was with a man who experienced an awakening when he was 29. And at the time I spoke to him, he was 91 years old. So he'd spent 62 years in this awakened state. And he told me, he said, even now after 6 decades, I'm still discovering more. There's still a deepening every day. It's an endless exploration. I think that's true. There is no end point. You don't become enlightened and you think, wow, that's it. I'm here. There's nothing more to do. I can just take it easy from now on and just enjoy my enlightenment. That doesn't happen. It's an endless adventure. There's endless. It's like a landscape, a never-ending landscape that you keep exploring. And also, life is never static. Life always creates new challenges for us, and those challenges may affect our wakefulness. It may take us in a new direction. And that's one of the glorious things about it, that it's an endless adventure.
Steve, where can our listeners connect with you and be part of your community and learn more about your book, The Adventure?
The best place is my website, which is stephenmtaylor.com. That's Stephen with a V, M for Mark, stephenmtaylor.com. On my website, I've got links to my social media accounts, and there are lots of articles and lots of information about my courses and talks and so forth.
Well, Stephen, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
Thank you, Marianne. It's very enjoyable. Thanks.
Well, thank you, Steve. It's been such an honor to spend this time with you and to talk about your new book, The Adventure, A Practical Guide to Spiritual Awakening, an Eckhart Tolle edition. The Adventure is available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and everywhere books are sold, including the publisher, New World Library, at newworldlibrary.com. Well, we're at the end of our time today. I'd like to thank everyone for tuning in. You've been listening to Moments with Marianne, where we make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary. A recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.